Alright, hello YouTube. Let's knock out the disclaimers. All these views are my own and do not reflect the Department of Defense, and these views are apolitical. They do not endorse decisions or actions on either side. Merely analyzes events from a game theory perspective and logic, and how that will affect the stock market, U.S. economy, U.S. commodity markets, equities, etc. overall. But jumping into it, we've got news for today. The S&P 500 down, NASDAQ all down by about 1/3%. Oil up about 2%. 10-year yield relatively unchanged. Cryptocurrencies down a little bit. Not as big of a swing in prices as I expected. Now, granted, it's only futures markets trading right now. We'll see how the markets open up tomorrow. There's going to be any discrepancy there. But right now it looks like Iran has not launched any kind of counterstrike against the U.S. And the big question is, are they going to? Now, JP Morgan published an article today calling for $120 to $130 a barrel crude oil price, as well as 5% inflation. That seems a little drastic. I don't think things will be that bad. We'll see how things play out in the next week here, but what I'm putting my finger on is $80 a barrel for crude oil. Right now it's sitting at 75 per trading, and it all hinges upon if Iran strikes the U.S. back or any U.S. allies or affiliated countries. Now, what that could look like, they've threatened to mine the Straits of Hormuz. I've already ruled that out as a possibility. The U.S. Navy would, in quick order, sink them. I think this was in the 1970s or 80s. The U.S. Navy sunk half the Iranian Navy in the span of, I think, 12 hours or something. And they've already got 2 aircraft carriers plus a British aircraft carrier that should already be there, I'm imagining, and then another one in the Mediterranean. They wouldn't stand a chance if it was just Iran and the U.S. But we could see something like the Houthis when they were engaged, blocking the, I think, Bar al-Mandab Strait off the coast of Yemen, which is a choke point. The Red Sea comes up through there to the Suez Canal. From there to Europe, a lot of trade goes through there. I think 20% world trade. But the Houthis were doing was launching missiles, taking out ships or holding them up, which spooked a lot of trade companies from using that route. We could see something similar happen with the Iranians here, where they hide out in the mountains and try and launch the missiles over into the Persian Gulf, targeting oil tankers. The U.S. said they're monitoring where they're moving their missile systems to. So that might see mixed results there. And Iranian proxies could see an uptick in activity. Maybe the Houthis start messing with the shipping in the Red Sea again, and they could try and split up the U.S. forces and spread them thin. But in the short term, I don't see it going over $80 a barrel of crude. Now, as I touched on earlier, it's all the question of if Iran will respond or not and how that'll affect the price of oil. They could do nothing, which would hurt them geopolitically. It would make them look weak, and the price of crude would remain relatively unchanged, but the benefit to them would be that they can be viewed as kind of not striking back, being the defender in the conflict, versus if they do attack, or counterstrike rather, the U.S. would most definitely respond to that, and that would incur further strikes. Now, I think this was an Iranian state media source, so you have to take it with a grain of salt, but they claim that they moved all of the uranium out of the facilities. And if that's true, we could very well see more strikes on that regard there, because if the U.S. didn't take out those facilities, then begs the question, what was the entire point of striking an empty facility? Maybe the U.S. stops there and uses that as kind of a big stick diplomacy to spook the Iranians into making peace, or maybe they pursue attacking until they actually get the uranium, provided what the Iranians are saying is true. We don't quite know yet. I'd imagine they would continue the pace, because it doesn't look like Iran is coming to the negotiating table at all. And again, that's all just speculation. I don't endorse any policy decision on either side there by any country. I'm merely interested in how that affects the market. So what we'll see, I imagine, from this day forward until 2030 is a massive increase in defense spending. And that's because China has stated it's their goal by 2027 to 2030 to bring Taiwan back into the fold. And I don't think the U.S. would let that happen. So we'd likely see increased defense spending, which in turn would bring newly created debt and a subsequent increase in GDP and inflation and a devaluing of the dollar. Massive quantitative easing expansion under the guise of wartime stimulus. But today, where is it here? We'll pull this one up. Per Reuters, House narrowly passes tax cut bill adding $3.8 trillion to the debt. After quashing rebellion by budget hawks, the bill now goes on to the Senate, where another fight will ensue. And, folks, I'm not Republican or Democrat. Is it too much to ask for a balanced budget? Like, can we just... Right now, it's outside the realm of possibility. At least in the short term, if ever. Can we just not go trillions of dollars into debt every year? Is that too much to ask? Is it too much to ask to just make things work out? Now, if we continue down this policy of debt acquisition, now mind you, this only passed the House. It still has to pass the Senate. It could change. But I've been modeling this since my senior year in college of my economics thesis paper that I wrote, of how debt was outpacing revenue. And there's an old paper from the Bank of International Settlements that analyzed different countries, their relative debt sizes compared to their GDP ratios, and how that affects real GDP growth. And I apologize for any of you not well versed in economics. I will nerd out here for a little bit, a quick minute spiel. But with this, if the theory is kind of simple to follow. If a country, according to the Bank of International Settlements, is sitting around 80% debt to GDP ratio, they'll see a decline in real GDP growth. Now, as follows, that could be attributable to, at least from what I think, is if a country is devoting a massive portion of their budget to paying off interest, kind of from the Keynesian economics point of view, that's not going out into the real economy to actually jog the economy. And according to Keynesianism, even if the government just wasted all their money, say they bought, in a simplified scenario, say the government had $1 trillion in receipts of taxes, tariffs, etc. that they brought in, and they bought $1 trillion worth of lumber that they just burned. The idea would be that the economy would still grow from that, because that $1 trillion would go to companies that cut down trees. Those companies would pay companies like Caterpillar for machines to cut down those trees. Money from there would go to workers, say lumberjacks, or factories that make the machines to cut down logs and process them, and from there those would go to supermarkets, and so on and so forth. There would be a compounding effect from that money. If, say, they brought in $1 trillion of revenue and they spent $500 billion of that, so half, on paying interest on national debt, where does that money go? That goes to people who bought the debt. oftentimes the central bank of a country, other central banks, individual investors. And from there, the money kind of just gets locked in stasis. So likely the investors would reinvest that money, roll it over into more bonds, or in the case of a central bank, gets locked in its coffers somewhere and subsequently reinvested. So now the budget in our hypothetical scenario is dealing with half their money or revenue being spent to money that goes into effectively a stasis, cryosleep, and isn't going out into the economy. And that's where I think the decrease in real GDP growth is attributable to that. But I've got a really long video planned for that, about an hour deep dive, where I'll cover my paper that I wrote and kind of refit it to the modern times, because that was 2 years ago. Things have changed a little bit, and I'll go into my line of thinking there. Not to completely derail this video here, because this is about today's events. But reviewing my notes here, we already covered Iran. And PE bankruptcies was also... Actually, we'll cover the first quick spiel here. This kind of goes away from the economics of the world. But according to Forbes, 16 billion Apple, Facebook, Google, and other passwords were leaked. That was today. So I'd recommend you go in and change all of your passwords. I already did that. That was articles sent to me by a buddy of mine that works in cybersecurity. Apparently it's the biggest data breach out there, and that should be concerning, because your information could be out there right now, and it behoove you to protect yourself. And you could use a password manager or something. Let me find it. I wrote it down earlier. Bitwarden was what my cybersecurity buddy recommended me. This isn't a sponsored video or anything, but he said, change every password and use Bitwarden to manage your passwords. That's what I did. I'd recommend you all do the same there. Very big data breach on that front. And the saddest part of the video is I was doing research today, instead of actually having any meaningful hobby, just reading internet forums and jumping around from article to article, research paper to research paper. And I stumbled upon this, and there's not much traction on it, but it was horrifying when I read it. But going into this, back over the last decade and a half, private equity has been expanding into pretty much any company you can imagine, like small mom and pop HVAC shops, dentistry, optometry, to their biggest clients like Jones or Hooters. And back in 2020, when rates were very low, they saddled these companies up with a lot of debt with those cheap rates. And a lot of those companies are nearing bankruptcy now. Now, you might ask, because Jones, for example, 95% of their stores are profitable right now. How are these companies nearing bankruptcy? Hooters, for example, just filed for bankruptcy in Texas. It's looking like they may file Chapter 11 nationwide. But how have these companies reached this position with supposedly this debt they've been saddled up with? And I'm laughing because it has got to be maybe one of the funniest things I've seen, and also one of the most sad things I've seen. But these private equity firms loaded these companies up with I can't even read it without laughing. Back floating rate loans. $3.8 trillion amalgamated into all of this. And they repackaged them into collateralized loan obligations that they couldn't even change the name. They changed one word in the name, from a collateralized debt obligation, which we had in 2008, where we packaged subprime mortgages into CDOs, collateralized debt obligations, and then marketed those out to pension funds. Literal slop that the rating agencies rated AAA and put it in the trough of these pension funds to eat like pigs. But they learn nothing. These are one word changed in the acronym, a collateralized loan obligation now, which private equity firms sold to banks who repackage it into these debt interest debt investments, basically. Forgetting the word. And then they're just sold to pension funds again. So we learned nothing from 2008. And it's you gotta think, are these people morons? Are these people complete morons, or is it just greed? Is it just greed? Because the people on Wall Street are they're pretty smart. All the people I know through my cousin are a lot smarter than me. And is it just all greed? Is that what it boils down to? Are they just making the same, walking off the same cliff like we did in 2008? Now, for comparison here, I was reviewing my notes with my cousin, and I was reading off the factoids there. And I got to the amount of debt out there, and I said 3.8 trillion in adjustable rate loans. And I guess he misheard me, because he said 3.8 billion in adjustable rate loans. That's a lot. And I said, no, not billion, trillion, with a T, with the trillion. To put that in perspective, there were 1.3 trillion in subprime mortgages in 2008. Now, from there were a host of derivatives made off those, such as synthetic CDOs, the market of which stretched to, I think, around $20 trillion, which is why when the mortgage industry collapsed, it was such a crap show there. And with this, the 1.3 trillion in 2008 versus 3.8 trillion now, it's 3 times as big as 2008. 3 times as big. And this isn't affecting one aspect of life, such as housing. This is affecting everything you can imagine, from your dentist to your HVAC technician to your daycares to your emergency rooms to Hooters or Joann's. And I was running through the calculus in my head here, because there's not much technical information you can get on this. It's not like you can pull up a prospectus on one of these collateralized loan obligations and read into it like Michael Burry did in 2008. It's all hidden behind the black box of private equity. It's impossible to know how these are performing, how many synthetic CLOs, I guess in this case, are on these, how many side bets there are. And it's like, are we just... It might be over here. If this is as bad as I think it is, even if it's half as bad as I think it is, the problem is still 3 times as big. You can't make it up. You can't make it. I couldn't make the... I can't... You held a gun to my head. I could not make this up. That's a quote from Gregory Mannarino. Check out his channel. Provides wonderful analysis, but he always says that in his videos. If you held a gun to my head right now, I couldn't make this up if I tried. My life depended on it. But running through the calculus in my head here, even with these tariffs we saw, likely from the tariffs, Q1 2025, negative 0.3%. Real GDP growth, we'll see how Q2 2025 real GDP ends up. That's in September of this year coming up. We'll see the long-term effects of these tariffs, or the intermediate term effects. And my line of thinking here is, at least if, from the realm of traditional economics, if these tariffs have any meaningful impact, which I think they will, and business activity decreases by even a small amount, these companies are already skating on thin ice. They're already on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. Now, what happens if there's a 10% reduction in revenue? Of people saying, well, let's cut out the daycare, let's just have the kids at home. If people are struggling to make ends meet, if they say, oh, we're not going to go to Hooters for dinner, or we're not going to go to Joann's to go shopping, what happens to these companies if there's even a 10% reduction in revenue? They all go belly up. Now, what happens to these collateralized loan obligations? Well, these private equity companies aren't going to be able to find anyone to buy this crap, which nor should anyone be buying this crap. But it's just going to be a complete collapse there, and the ultimate people to suffer are the pension funds that own this. And it also calls into question the managers of these pension funds for are they even doing their job? Are they even looking at the slop they're buying? Or are they just loading it up and collecting their fee and calling it a day's work completed, and who cares what happens to old people? Is that what's happening? Is that what we stoop down to? Does no one have any feeling of responsibility anymore of the well-being of our seniors? It's just depressing, really. It's just blatant greed, private equity abusing cheap debt to turn a quick buck. And it's the what'll follow. What will follow if this comes to pass in the next couple of years is that all these companies go belly up, and we just see the mass corporatization of everything. Everything will just become like Vail. If you ski a lot, there's not going to be... One second. There's these cats fighting outside. I'll wrap this video up. It'll be the mass corporatization like Vail ski resorts. Before, you had small mom and pop ski shops, and then you had everything just get corporatized under one umbrella. And it just turned the whole experience to crap. Everything, all the prices went up. Lost any spirit in the small business side of things. And the big corporations will just win out in the end. They'll consolidate power and just buy up all these businesses that died off. We'll see what happens. I want to do more of a deep dive into this, but unfortunately, there just doesn't exist that much data out there on this. I'll have to see if I can find something, dig up. But I'm going to make this my mission over the next week to get to the bottom of this. But we'll see how it turns out. Have a good day, y'all. We'll see how the markets turn out tomorrow. I'm sure everything will be fine. We'll probably see a little bit of up and down and a little bit of a freak out, but it shouldn't be that big of an issue. At the end of the day, I think the war will still be limited. It won't be boots on the ground or anything like Iraq, but everything will be fine. Have a good day, y'all. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.